Welcome to this week's episode. And I think this week we were thinking about discussing a particular topic, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
But it starts out with...
No, I lied, sorry. There wasn't a technical problem. You were doing so well with that introduction.
Ominous
it
finger
starts
up.
out with, and you're sitting there with a finger.
And I'm like, okay.
Okay. So
Where do we go from here? Okay. So this memory came up. So we used to house sit for many years. We were house sitting. And we had a dear friend who graciously and kindly would open their door to us once in a while in between house sits. And
it was nice. It was an opportunity to stay with them really and hang out. But yes.
Yeah, but it was really generous.
It was really kind, very generous.
Some of his friends once made this comment, and I think from their side it was slightly, not overly, but slightly pejorative, slightly sort of where they said, oh, the monks are staying with you again. And, you know, some people might take offense to that. But actually, right. I think both of us were like,
No, yeah, that fits.
Yeah, that's accurate.
They observed, because they were all quite, outward and, just regular people in the world, working and living and, going out for drinks on the weekends or even, whatever, just living a normal householder life.
Yeah, and good people, but very ordinary, not spiritual, not
just good people.
Yeah.
But worldly people. And so we would show up
every few months.
Show up every few months or whatever for a weekend or a week or a couple of weeks. And I guess our friend would be, talking to them. And they say, oh, you got some friends, and say, oh, are you going to go out and do it? No, he must have been saying, no, they don't really go out. Oh, right. Do they do that? No, they don't really. We were just in. We were again. This is how we live. This is what this conversation's about. This is it reflected back to us how the obviousness of how we're living our lives.
And how that looks to most people, I guess.
That is, let's say, it's inward.
Yeah,
it's not worldly. It's not that we're
we don't reject any part of the world. It's just that's not where our attention is, our focus is.
Yeah.
It's not, it's like a lot of people, it's about, getting lots of money or lots of things or doing lots of activities, having lots of experiences.
Yeah.
These things are very sort of normal focuses of a lot of people.
Yeah. It's the worldly life.
They're not our focus particularly. It's not to say we don't reject any of that stuff, but it's not our focus.
Well, I think that's it. We're not literally monks.
No.
But what that opened up, and this came up recently because I was reading a book, and it really brought into focus the different ways that people can live, particularly in the spiritual domain. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't read anything that was so on point and spoke to me so affirmatively and confirmatively that that's me. That's you. That's
and we already knew this, it wasn't it's like there's nothing quite like reading it in black and white when someone's in someone else's words that so mirror and match your own experience.
And the book was, and probably some people have heard about it, and some haven't. So it's called The Cloud of Unknowing, and it was a book written in the medieval times, about the 14th century, by an anonymous monk who basically just mapped out the details and the insight into contemplative life. And it's a really profound book, actually. I recommend it.
And you got a particular, if I recall rightly, you were looking for a particular translation. There's quite a few versions of it. Is that
right?
correct?
Yeah.
Am
I mean,
right
if you're going to read it in the original Middle English,
yes.
it's absolutely it's a mind bender, and so you're spending most of your time trying to. It's sort of nominally English, but it's not even modern English. You can't really read it, and there are some modern translations of it that make it a bit more readable. But it's I knew there was good stuff in there over the years, but I never quite found a copy, and that was faithful and readable.
Right.
So the one I've been reading now is a translation by a woman called Carmen Acevedo Butcher.
Wow, that's a name.
It is. She's I think she's a Hispanic academic scholar,
nice.
And I don't know to what degree she's a spiritual practitioner, but really, really readable but really faithful to the original. So because you don't want to read these translations that are so far removed.
Well, it changes being said. Yeah, exactly. The interpretation of what's being said. If it's too heavy-handed, it's no longer the feeling of what is being conveyed beyond the words.
Well, and this is it. And I mean, this has been the curse of as an aside, this has been the curse of translations of scriptures and spiritual writings and everything. Yeah, it's very. And I mean, often if I'm reading something, I'll which is a translation. A lot of them are from, say, Sanskrit or Pali in the Buddhist, and Sanskrit or Greek, exactly, Greek, Hebrew. The Bible's just, it's so loaded with a cultural. It's very hard,
but also the words of the time. We use certain words to mean certain things at certain eras, so that also can change things. Translation's
really difficult. So it's good to get a few. And having had in the case of the Cloud, I'd had seen the original. I'd seen a translation into modern English, which wasn't great for my ears. And then this one's fantastic. So, and there are others that I'm told that are really great too. But anyway, the point was that. Reflecting on the monkish thing, because I was like, hey, I've just read this thing and it's really right. It just,
you shared what you were reading with me, and that spurred the inclination to have this discussion. Yeah,
because it points to the value and the actual place of the contemplative life, and it talks about what the, let's say, the contemplative, the spiritual, the reflective life. And all spiritual traditions have this, right? Yeah. But we've kind of lost it in the West, natively in the West,
particularly the Protestant West.
Yeah, exactly. We've good point. Not just the West, but particularly the Protestant West, because in the West generally, the contemplative tradition, which is people who would withdraw basically from worldly concerns
and be supported in doing
that, but
culturally being supported.
But, right, the context, the culture would understand what that was about, and we've lost that in the last sort of 500 years or so, or maybe a bit more. I mean, certainly the dissolution of the monasteries was like
in the UK.
In the UK. Was a big part of that for us, and so the culture's lost this. I would argue has lost the understanding that there are people who are spiritually oriented and unworldly.
Yeah,
they don't, but
they're not moved by the same things that most would be moved by.
Yeah,
and I think that's the biggest thing for me, is just recognizing the things that move me. Like the things that spur an action, let's say, are not necessarily the same things that would spur most, let's say.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, it's where your attention is, right? And that is a thing that is a function of interest. Mm-hmm. It's a function of attraction. Yeah. It's follow your bliss. Now, if your bliss is, the good life, let's say, nice things, holidays,
experiences,
good food, good drink, experiences, even wholesome things, family life, and all this. That's all very good, and that's it. But that really represents the worldly life. but at some point, some people, I mean, and this is all we're talking about, is us.
Yeah.
You know, that is not of, that isn't charming. What is charming? Oh, living in the heart, living in the spiritual heart, that exploration, that abidance. And that then becomes not something you do as a side project. It becomes your entire life is sort of consumed by this inward direction and the goodness and the bliss of that.
Your whole orientation is set around being, not doing, I would say.
Nice, yeah, exactly.
And your whole orientation is set towards communion and union with the divine nature.
Absolutely.
That doesn't exclude the human nature, but that's the fundamental orientation.
It's which way the human nature is oriented, isn't it? And so, this book is interesting. It's quite famous for the Cloud of Unknowing. It's quite famous for, most people will know it, and the focus has been more on it of late, the last sort of couple of decades or more, because it became the details in the book of this anonymous monk was explaining his methods and his techniques of how to approach and engage in contemplative life.
Beautiful.
And it's in places it's there's some very specific descriptions, pointers of how to approach this life. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book, actually. So I'm waxing on it, but it's a really lovely exposition. But so it became the foundation back in the 70s. A Trappist monk called Father Thomas Keating, basically in response, I won't, not a big spiritual history lesson, but in response to the fact that back in the first half of the 20th century, in the West, we were getting this big influx of Eastern influences, whether it was, people like Yogananda, D.T. Suzuki, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, with all introducing us to these, the wisdom of the East, whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism or Taoism or whatever. But also these methods, and the methods were mostly about inner silence. And when in Christian thinking for a long span of time, it's been mostly propitiatory prayer. Oh God, please do this for me. Oh God, blah blah blah, and you focus on his attributes. And in the Cloud, he's what they call apophatic, which is without attributes, and so it's about dwelling, abiding in the silence of God's presence. This is
similar to the Eastern viewpoint.
Yeah. So he's talking about it. So anyway, contemplative prayer, centering prayer was developed in response, a restoration of an old Christian tradition of silent meditation, silent contemplation. Yeah. And so it's that's
sort of the difference between, to me, like prayer in the traditional sense is sort of speaking to God, and contemplation is more listening to God.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. That's exactly it.
That's how I approach it anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, and sort of just abiding in that listening, in the abidance of the presence. And actually, centric prayer is a really beautiful approach, beautiful technique. So anyway, so that was where the Cloud of Unknowing became famous. Let's say in the last, in particularly in spiritual circles in the last few decades. But what I picked
on 40 years now.
Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah. I think. But what really, when I was reading it, obviously appreciating that beautiful side of it, which is how to approach that. But I loved what he was talking about. And okay, there are stages in human life of approach to the divine, to one's nature, and he was talking about these 4 different approaches, and 2 of them, the first 2 are what he called actives. It's the active life. as opposed to the other two. The progression then in spiritual life is they become contemplative. Mm-hmm. So and then there's this then inflection point between these between the active and the contemplative. But I really love the way he calls worldly people actives, So it's actives versus contemplatives.
Well, there's the doing versus the being.
Exactly.
And actually, I would argue, although it definitely can change the outward action, let's say, in terms of how a life looks.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably more about the inward attitude towards life, which
Indeed.
then is reflected in the outward. But
Right.
not necessarily. For instance, you and I are quite different in our day-to-day lives, actively speaking.
Yeah.
And if you looked at it, you could say, oh, well, Martyn's the contemplative and Imogen is the active. But actually, I don't see it that way at all.
No.
Because for me, all activity, this is why I'm saying I want to divorce the idea of activity versus active, because I don't, and contemplation versus no activity, because I don't see that they're necessarily the thing there. Because for me, all activity is coming from that place of contemplation, is coming from that place of silence.
Yeah.
Even though there's more activity, let's say.
Yeah, for sure. No, but it was just really lovely when I was reading it and we were originally having this conversation about, something I've struggled with in my life. I mean, the reason why we're even having this conversation now, why the cloud in particular struck me, is because I saw so much of my life and my own kind of struggle, because I was always like oriented towards what you could call the contemplative
from
the end
really
of life.
early age,
from really early.
Always.
And it's not that I didn't engage with life outwardly and have jobs and do this and that, but it was never where I was at home and given half a chance. I was always kind of happiest in my own
in a cave, in an ashram,
exactly.
A monastery.
Absolutely. I've been in caves and ashrams and retreats. That's, spent, the most meaningful parts of my life certainly were spent in those things for sustained periods. So,
and actually when we got into a relationship all those years ago, that was a contentious point for us to start with, because I was, there was that fear.
Well,
of like you going off into your cave, because you really had this belief that you couldn't be married and lead the life of contemplation that was a calling in your heart. That's a really good point, because and pivoting a little here, because that speaks to what does that speak to? Well, let's say you're right. We had that. We'd been together a while. Let's get personal. We'd been together for a while, and so much love already. Yeah.
But you knew me back then. You knew my orientation was.
You made that very clear from day one.
Was enlightenment.
Yeah.
That was it. The fact is that you were, raised as a meditator, and we met in a spiritual community in England, and so we met. So that was alive anyway. Yeah,
it wasn't like I was completely not at all interested in all of this stuff.
Yes, it was your baseline. The fact that you were whatever. Meditating and living in and going to
swimming in it, but I didn't realize I was swimming in it.
Exactly,
because I was swimming in it.
Right.
Didn't realize that was a fish.
Yes. But even within spiritual communities, there are many people who were there fine as a kind of a lifestyle.
We used to call them in the TM movement householders. You'd be either a householder or you'd be the TM movement's version of a monk.
Yeah, an ascetic or a renunciate or something. I think is more. Yeah, which again comes back to this idea of actives and contemplatives. Yeah. It's basically the same. It's a householder, actives, and
married,
contemplatives
children,
are
kids,
renunciates.
Jobs.
But we don't have, and so that's it. This is a universal idea that we're talking about.
Everywhere,
we're talking actives versus contemplatives, and I think in the East, as you just pointed out, because TM is from a sort of a Hindu or a Vedic, more specifically, origin. The idea of be a householder or a renunciate, you would give it all up, and that's quite a clear demarcation, right? It's a pretty, you do literally give everything up. But we're talking in some sense about, well, yes, but also it's relatively like if you.
Again, it's this thing of it's not necessarily about the outward looking life, whether you're living in a cave or you're living married with kids. It's where it comes, where your heart is, where you come from, where you are seated in yourself. To me, there's the difference.
And how it looks actually sometimes about what the culture supports. And so talking about the loss of the contemplative tradition in the Protestant West, because Christianity is, let's say, our wisdom tradition, in the West. Whereas in the East, and even in the Eastern Orthodox, you have, there's a contemplative tradition. In Catholic, there's still a contemplative tradition. So, in a sense, the Protestant West has seems to almost entirely abandon that. But if you look at the Far East, then those traditions are culturally, universally understood, and it's a choice. Whereas it's hard. This is what I was saying. For me, in the West, it was harder. It was harder to kind of embrace that contemplative life because no one understands.
I wonder if it's also a modern cultural phenomena as well. I wonder if in the Eastern...
a modernist.
That actually these issues might also be coming up as well.
Right.
That it's not just a factor of, for instance, the Protestant church, but just modern life in itself.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Might actually be, particularly in the way that we're turning away from attention towards the divine and turning more into the material, turning more into the individual and the small self, let's say.
Well, that's the big. It's really interesting. You brought in the modernist perspective because it's all about exteriors.
Exactly.
There's no, it's things that you can measure in the world, kind of thing. And so there's been a neglect and then a dismissal of inner experiences.
And we just might be a little bit closer, further along that journey.
Well, the modernism
in this
as a
Western sort of
modernism
society.
as a stage was pretty much developed in the West, and particularly the Enlightenment.
And so I wonder if some of these other cultures that we're sort of holding up in this discussion, as they still support that, whether actually in time they're less and less supportive of that.
Well, I guess to the extent that they fully embrace those aspects of modernist thinking.
Yeah.
But certainly, that's interesting. It has a universalizing thing and an exteriorizing thing. It's secular materialism. Yeah, that's the whole thing. But so anyway, back to when we were we had been together for a while. Back to our personal story here. That I was all in for enlightenment. I was, committed to live and orient my life in that fashion. But I fell in love. What can you do?
Whereas I was sort of weakly being walked towards that, but not really caring much at all.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here.
No, it's true. It's true. You were, Yeah. And I think we broke up for like about a week. We had a long sitting conversation. It was like one day, because we were in and we were at our first doubling down. You either in these we have this theme in relationships. Whenever you hit a point of something, a bump. Yeah. You either walk away, you double down.
Yeah, and this was fairly early on.
That was fairly early on.
Yeah, and something
it was months in, even though we were kind of.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on relationships. I'm sure it will come up. But yeah, that was that first inflection point of doubling down or walking away.
But the first
we
walked away because we were right. We were on.
Yeah.
You were like you're gonna walk. You're gonna go one day. legs in this, because one day you're gonna disappear off to the Himalayas or something, or go to a cave and seek enlightenment.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, given half a chance, actually, because I have to. I can't not.
Yeah.
And we were like, well, we probably shouldn't get invested in this then.
Yeah, it was a few months in, so it was still early enough that...
I wailed that. Yeah, the moment we spent, I was like in bits though, that within, you went backstage, stayed back with your family, and I sort of was where we were and originally. And I just knew, even though that's what it seemed to add up to.
It made sense.
It made sense, but it was
not in
wrong,
our hearts.
wrong,
both of us. And that was what? How many years has it been now?
That was
19 years ago. I don't know.
2005 or something.
Yeah.
Within a few days, I was phoning you up, and you were phoning me, and we were like, we need to get back.
Yeah.
Within a week, we were back completely together. Anyway, there's all sorts of stories, but the point was that the belief that
you can't be a contemplative
and
yet be a householder.
Yes,
too.
Exactly. That those two.
You can't be married. This thing of married monks, which actually is mostly not supported, but there are some places where that is supported.
Well, Zen priests / monks are married. It's a thing. Well, I think it was like, for me, on a deeper spiritual note, for both of us, it was a bit like, we say, oh, you can't get enlightened unless, and then life goes, hold my beer.
Yeah.
Right?
We'll see.
You can't get enlightened if you're married. Anything less than a complete renunciation is not going to get
any
you.
Condition. While might be describing a general observation of most being true for most, is not a rule, because there is enough evidence that absolutely life moves in wonderfully mysterious ways, and awakening itself, there are no barriers to that. Conditions
material, relative conditions.
Not truly.
No.
Only in so much as the things we're walking through that occlude our true nature, because there's something to be seen there.
Yeah. Well, I always felt, or I came to see, let's put it that way, I came to see that we became so close, and we have this, incredible journey that we've had together, and the things we've gone through, and the challenges that have, these bumps in the road, let's say, that we again had to face. Oh, do we walk away or double down? We always double down deeper into it. And I would say, rather than awakening in spite of being being in partnership with someone, being in partnership with you was fundamental and instrumental in the lessons and the insights that I had to gain to wake up for both of us.
I wonder if it's also in relation to what we're talking about here in terms of contemplation. And again, to me, what contemplation means is where your orientation is to. And, the doubling down for me at the bottom of that was to do with that orientation. And it wasn't about a doubling down to get more of what you wanted.
Right.
It was a doubling down to open up to the divine nature that is beneath and holds all of this. Yeah. And so it's not so I guess I'm just speaking out loud here, but it's like this doubling down was not about doubling down to control and get more. No. Like, I want the relationship more. Like, it's actually an opening up. And to me, that is what the contemplative life speaks to. It speaks to an opening, a surrender, a trust of life, in the face of often a lot of misunderstanding about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we carry a lot of preconceptions about what spiritual life, what the process of spiritual awakening is about what it looks like. And I think part of that maybe is to do with that we're still trapped in a causal paradigm in regard to it, right? That, do things that will lead to
cause and effect,
deeper or more insight. It's causal, but it's
goal
not.
orientated.
Yeah, it's deeper. It's from inside out, not outside in.
Yeah.
You know, all these things are symptoms of our awakening, not the cause, and that's a fundamental shift of perspective when you drop into that, when you realize, awakening is that which is occurring. The things, it's not, you can't do anything to hasten it, but things fall away that obstruct it, right?
Yeah, the person that is achieving and mastering this is not the one that wakes up, actually.
No, for sure. What's that the thing, you wake up from the person. The person doesn't wake up, you wake up from person, something like that. Yeah. So, but it was funny. It was funny to have, those few years ago, have that mirrored back to us, because in some way, back in, what year was it? 2014? Was it 2014? We basically walked out of our life. Yeah. And,
2013, 2014.
We've been, living on and off normal, householdery type lives, although
still with a spiritual
within
spiritual community,
spiritual practice, fundamental, all that.
But it was a pretty typical life, on the surface, your house, your cats, your cars, your jobs, your going out of an evening, your friends, all of that was very typical looking, albeit with a spiritual emphasis. A deep spiritual emphasis. We were living in a spiritual community at Fairfield, Iowa at the time.
So, I was thinking about this earlier, that, at that point we walked out, and we directly walked out of that, sold everything, gave away the rest, and went to live, in an ashram, basically, with a couple of bags, each, and that was it. Really walked out of our life, really gave up everything in that kind of, almost archetypical way. And in some ways, I was thinking about this earlier, I don't think we ever really stepped back into it.
No.
We kind of have now. We are.
On the surface level, it looks like
we've got a house and we've got a car.
We could walk away from this tomorrow, and in the same manner. And I think what changed is the attachment to it all.
Yeah.
That's what's massively changed. Obviously it's very nice to have all the things we have now. We live quite a simple life compared to most, but it is definitely getting more normal looking from the outside right now. I mean, we've only recently been renting a place versus, basically nomads. Yeah.
But
I think the attachment and the focal point, and where the orientation,
and perhaps the knowledge that it's like this river of life, running along. You can't hold on to
any of it.
You can't hold on to no.
All of this is by the grace.
Yeah.
It's like, by the grace go we. Like, none of this is ours.
No, it's gifted. It's all a givenness of it. I mean, I keep coming back to that we talk about life's a gift. And of course, you quoted a sort of a kind of a variant on this idea, which was kind of funny earlier. What do you say? Life is grace. Sometimes fierce grace, to be sure, but still grace. And a similar thing I would say is, life's a gift. Yeah. Sometimes you don't want the gift. You don't want the smelly socks as a present or whatever, the dodgy ones with, but it's still a gift. It's given. It's given. It's given. It's not something that life isn't something actually that we earn, and not something we're entitled to. It's not something we can bring about or push away. And
I think as a contemplative, this intimately. Yeah. And you're not in resistance to that.
Yes.
And so it's like there's what I would describe a deep rest into the heart that accepts all that is happening and changeable as what it is, and yet comes from a place of knowing that I am beyond all of this.
Yeah. And also, yes, absolutely. And also this idea that the bells and whistles and the pleasure seeking of active life just doesn't really get me going.
No.
I'm happy for pleasure and things, good, nice things to come and go and all this, but you just see it coming and going, and that's
not what
not
stirs your heart.
It's not where the lasting happiness is. And so you take it as it comes and you let it go when it goes.
And it's funny because, I'm smiling. I can't even get the words out because I'm smiling right now. It's like, what is the greatest joy in life? Sinking into the silence. It's doing nothing.
Yes.
It's like one of the greatest joys in life. Totally surrendering and immersing yourself into the silence of beingness. And it's like, and it's hard to explain that, particularly to loved ones or, people around that's not maybe their focus. It's very hard to say, when someone says, "What are you doing?" And it's like,
No, it's really hard because, one thing, I like music occasionally to have around. I like certain kinds of music on occasion, but I don't want music on all the time. I don't want. I'm not. For example, we live in quietness.
We live in a very quiet life.
We don't even have a TV here.
No.
We don't have. Sometimes I really want to listen to, I don't know, Philip Glass or something. I'll put something on, something beautiful. But generally, the silence is so wonderful, and I'm happy to sit in it. I'm happy to be with it. It's so alive. What
is that thing? Alone together. We've often said that
alone
over the
together,
years. We enjoy spending time alone together.
Yeah, I mean, we are both actually, arguably introverts. Let's say to some degree, we like our own company, and the hermits in each other, and the company of silence. Yeah. We don't like being out and busy and party places and crowds of people. It's not our scene.
No. But even if that was our scene, so here's the thing. I'm trying to get to the heart of this because I feel like it's not just about being an introvert. It's not just about being physically quiet. It's about the silence in your heart and the orientation to that. So you can be out in crowds and busy. I mean, my life can be quite busy these days.
Well, this is it. The silence remains.
Yeah, so it's the orientation.
It's not like you have to go to the silence to have the silence.
Because actually, in many ways, even though I am a hermit and an introvert, like my life in comparison to yours, I would say, is quite busy.
Yeah, I'm much more of a on the surface contemplative. Exactly. I'll spend much more time quietly on my own. Yeah, but in solitude.
All the busyness for me doesn't ever detract from that inner quietude, and doesn't ever take away from that inner quietude. Well, I don't want to say ever. That would be
never say never.
Inaccurate because there, life situations that happen.
Yeah.
But in the grander scheme of things, it's to me the busyness flowers out of the action, flowers out of that contemplation of life, that relationship to life in that way.
Yeah, and let's be clear, just to because contemplate. It took me a while to get my head around this idea of contemplative.
Yeah.
And I know actually most of my spiritual, let's say, quotes, education and training, or was in the East. It's only lately I've actually started to reflect more on the Christian contemplative traditions, the mystic traditions. That's actually post awakening. I started to look at that more, much more. My influences and my approaches have been more, Vedic, Vedantic, Advaita, and Buddhism, Taoism. Those are the influences. So the word contemplation, just to be clear, refers as I understand it, in the Christian traditions, in the Western Christian traditions, the words meditation and contemplation mean the opposite kind of what they mean in the East. So if you say to someone, let's say in India, meditation, what you would imagine meditation to be is mostly an inner silence thing, all right? Dropping into your silent source, meditation, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, I understand what you're talking about. Yeah.
But that in the Western tradition in Western Christian, traditions would be called contemplation. Whereas if you said meditation in the Western Christian tradition, I'm talking about the methods, it would be to think over something, to meditate on it.
Right. Yes.
It's a different. So they're like inverted. Well, you probably wouldn't. Yeah, and so in the East you'd say to contemplate would be to think about.
Right.
Right. So they're inverted.
Interesting.
So yeah. So it's worth. What
are we talking about when we say contemplation?
Well, when we're talking about as we're talking about the Cloud of Unknowing, comes from this sort of Christian monastic. He's really talking about the contemplative state of being, which is very much a silent, witnessing form of what we would call in the East meditation,
awareness type meditation.
Exactly. So it's worth bearing in mind.
Yeah,
contemplation.
it's good to clear that. It's amazing how words you can say two exactly the same, similar words, and depending on the context, they mean very different things.
Yeah, you've got to establish your terms, haven't you?
Yeah, we have to say, are we talking apples and oranges here, or are we talking,
So to contemplate in this context isn't to sit around thinking about things. No. It's, although, it is to actually, it's the contemplative, it could be, but really the contemplative state of being is very much a silent awareness type of place. And the contemplative life is a life that's oriented, daily activities are oriented towards that and in support of that primarily. Yeah. So, I don't know. Sorry, I just digressed to a definition.
It was a very good thing that we should have done that at the beginning. But yes,
it took me a while to get my head around what
was being spoken about the contemplative life.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll just touch on some of the other things that struck me looking back at the cloud. He talks about and this is interesting. Okay, so this is interesting to me because we have an interest, let's say, or observation of spiritual stages in life, right? Yeah. The path to enlightenment awakening is the spiritual path is marked by stages.
Yeah, unfoldings
and some,
insights that go along with that deepening and unfolding of the nature of life. Yes.
Yeah. It certainly was for me.
It might not be linear in the same way for everyone.
Well, that's why I think
there's similarities and general viewpoints that can be sort of seen.
Yeah. So he talked about. Let me see if I can. So there was the 4 stages. I mentioned them of spiritual life. He called ordinary, special, singular, and perfect. So the ordinary is basically just people living their normal lives. That's kind of it. And he sees it, and this is I'm paraphrasing this. If I butcher this, and there's some expert on this who wants to come back and say that's not what he said at all, fine. I'm happy to be wrong. But ordinary life is just living an ordinary life, a worldly life. And then what happens is the second stage of development, which we call special. Now, I'm paraphrasing this, but what this looks to me is the birth through grace, actually, of the interest in the divine.
So someone would say, in terms of context of what we're talking about, of spiritual awakening, either there can be a shock of a crisis or a shock, or just a dawning interest and movement and curiosity towards the nature of life and those bigger questions.
And they might start. I love the way the author here. I always refer to him as the author. He talks about it very much in terms of grace, and that it's like God calling you to develop through these stages, bringing you closer and closer.
That so mirrors my viewpoint of I absolutely agree with that viewpoint of life. It's all grace, and it is all a burgeoning seed planted in the heart that develops and grows into a mighty oak.
Well, this, it's funny when reflecting on my own experience of living the contemplative life, and is that it's not a choice.
No one chooses to go on. I mean, really.
No,
it's really not. No, it's because it's a hard path.
Well, yeah, you're going against
it challenges everything.
And actually, this is a really funny thing, because I've made a couple of notes here from the Cloud, and he says, blah blah blah. To this day, actives complain about contemplatives out of ignorance. He says, when someone is called and turns towards the spiritual, whether that's, incremental, as I say, like you go from ordinary to special, it means you might get involved more, you might do more, but your inclination is inward into deeper,
you might start dropping
prayer,
some
meditation,
of these other things of life.
Exactly. But you're still in the active, and it's almost like the second stage is a sort of a spiritually supplemented worldly life. Yeah. So you might start meditating in practice. You might start
reading a book or
turning up at a satsang, or right. The spiritual has been awakened in you.
Yes.
Right. It's the beginning of that, as you say, that seed that's begun. But it's funny talking about, you start to. Well, let's get to the next stage first, because this is where it actually gets more interesting. So those two first stages, the worldly, which is ordinary, and then the special, which is a sort of spiritually awakened, starting to awaken. The seed is planted and starting to, but you're still very much engaged in the worldly life. Yep. But at a certain point, I mean, this is reflected in our life entirely. At a certain point, you're stepping out of the worldly life. Yeah. Because any energy that you're giving or attention you're giving to worldly life is less energy and attention you give to the divine within, your own awakening nature in the heart. And so the third stage then is the contemplative life proper. It is, your focus is that, and he calls that singular,
which is perfect, because you have singular attention, singular focus.
And so, like us.
There's a fire in your belly for all of this.
Yes, and point, all you're doing and wanting to do is, whether if you're in a kind of a, depends on what tradition you're in, but the fact is you're moving towards the divine in your own heart or in whatever, and that's you've perhaps even it's alive within you, as you say, right? The fire is there, the fire of that living,
the fire of that call. It's a call, absolutely. I would say. Specifically use that word, calling. It's a calling. Yeah, exactly. It's a call to the depths of being.
Yeah. And truth, and that's all you want. All the world.
It's orientation.
And so you stepped out of the world at that point. And you might find yourself in a community. Yeah. You might find yourself or just hiding out. And often people just find themselves in their own rooms,
and I think
not
that
really
can be
able to function in the world.
Yeah, really be misunderstood by those that are functioning in the world in the ways that you maybe once were. Yeah. Can really be misunderstood as, things like laziness, or things like, your life's falling apart, and and that's a hard thing to it can be very isolating and very ostracizing from your friends and family, maybe not through fault of anyone, but just through the nature of what's occurring.
Well, that's, brings me back to this quote, when the author here says, whenever someone feels the stirring through grace to relinquish worldly business and affairs and embrace the contemplative life as best they can, following their conscience, and without exception, their brothers, sisters, closest friends, and many others who don't understand the reasons or the life of contemplation start complaining loudly all at once, sharply opposing the decision.
I mean, we've certainly been through that in our life. Yeah. We had what looked like a perfect life, a great life. Yeah. And within 8 weeks, I think it was 8 weeks' time, we basically just sold it up, gave it away. Yeah. And there was a lot of, from people close and far, even, people just acquaintances and not understanding it, and close family members and friends.
I remember going,
are not getting it and really questioning us.
I remember someone, on the side saying, because we had gone to live in an ashram and sold all our property and given up any work or anything like that, and we were just totally dedicated to our spiritual growth. And someone said, what about their pensions?
Yes, I remember that.
I thought that was like, bless. But this other quote, and that the author says here, I believe that we should overlook worldly men and women whose ignorance, no offense, leads them to criticize contemplatives. Though sometimes they're rude in the way that they disapproval, they only understand the active life.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. There's no understanding for and someone who's at stage 1, let's say, of the spiritual life, the ordinary, the worldly, living their lives. They haven't got to a point where they've come to the second stage where there's some sense of the spirit and some sense of the value and the turning to that, and whatever that process looks like, that spiritual supplement that feeds the soul. They haven't got there, so no way are they going to understand someone who gives up all worldly life and.
Yeah, it's the phrase that just immediately popped into my head was "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do."
Right on.
And it's you can't judge someone for that, but you have to stay true to what is in your heart. And that can be really quite challenging in the face of doubt, in the face of doubters, because this is such a calling that has no end, as in you don't know the end goal of the calling. It's not a goal orientated, right? I work my way up and I'll get £1,000. It's not goal orientated. And so you're giving your whole life, both in the bigger sense, but also moment to moment sense, to the contemplative beingness of life. Yeah. And it is not through the lens of goals.
No, it's not.
And so it's like, and so of course there's doubt there. There's doubt from outer, and there can be inner doubt there as well.
Well, that's why I wanted to mention that, what the author's saying here, and what my experience has been throughout your life, and you too, is that you're going to get criticism, misunderstanding, not just, that's strange, but people are sometimes going to be quite
pointed in there,
unkind, let's say, or very judgmental. Oh, you're crazy, blah blah blah. But also, there's the voice of the superego that sits in our heads anyway. And I'm feeling I've come across many people, in my work and otherwise, who have had this calling into this third stage, which is fully dedication and the full focus of one's life and activities towards their spiritual growth, divine within, however we want to view that, but the truth, coming into that, and all they can do now is to be with God, be with the self, be in that oriented that way. But if you haven't got, and this is why we're talking about context earlier, and cultural understanding of certain, support of that. We're in this modernist thing. There's very little support for the spiritual, but particularly for these spiritual stages, which is, I got nothing for the world anymore. I can't function there. I can only function here. But because of the voices you're getting from the outside and the internalized voices, you're pathologizing your condition. Okay. I'm useless. I can't do anything. There was this joke. It was when we were in the ashram, and they were making up T-shirts, which I found funny. And one of the T-shirts was good for nothing.
I've got it.
Oh, you've got
have the T-shirt, and I love that T-shirt.
Good for nothing. And it's a joke, and any worldly person would go, "What? That's terrible." I
love that T-shirt.
But it was like a recognition that we've fallen into grace here, and this is all that we're about now, and that's it. We're good for nothing. Good for nothing.
We're good.
We're good for nothing. Exactly. So, that was it. And so, but I see so many people who might fall, this awakening happens, this begins to happen. They're moving through these stages, and then they're in this stage now, what do you call it? The singular stage, where it's just the one pointedness of their necessity to be in communion with their own spirit, or communion with God, or the self, whatever we want to call it, truth, life itself. And they're just not, there's no understanding for it from the outside world. And so what I found beautiful coming to this book was how beautifully he articulated these ideas, and how supported I felt now, even now that I live in total contentment in my contemplative condition, let's say, right? And my life is oriented to that. My interest and my love is, in that introspective, contemplative way of being. But I still, these nagging doubts, I should probably not.
Oh, the messaging. Like bombarded with that culturally message of like, you're not being this, you're not doing that, all of that sort of, unless you are doing this,
So I found it very affirming. And I think I came to you with some excitement, didn't I? With this, going, this is great, But the understanding, like, actives do not understand the contemplative life.
Yeah.
And it says this, there's this great quote. He says, this isn't, every once in a while we need to be saying, actives, work as hard as you can in the first and second stages, first one, then the other. And if you feel like it, you have the energy, be bold and do both. But don't bother contemplatives. You don't know what crosses they bear. Leave them alone. Let them sit in the peace.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, from someone who's obviously had that struggle and that insight, and willing to sort of articulate it, really.
And I just want to bring you back to your trajectory here.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the fourth.
Oh, the fourth state. Yeah, well, the fourth state, I would say, it's called perfect.
Well, you didn't say that. He called it perfect. So the stages are ordinary, special, singular, and perfect. So the singular is that complete dedication to that life. You're singular in your focus on truth. Perfect. Mm-hmm.
I would say this, I just have to frame it in my own terms, really. This is awakening. There's no more orientation at all, in some sense. It's just life is completely and naturally and spontaneously the movement of the divine.
Yeah. I have a...
It's the abidance.
Yeah. I've had... There's another way that this... these stages that are being described in the Cloud of Unknowing, there's another way that I couch this, and it's slightly different, but I think it speaks to it very beautifully as well. And we've talked about this before. In fact, I think it was even you even brought this up, but this was years ago. And actually from there, I've really seen the truth of that in my own life, and also in many of the people I work with. And it's like the first stages of life, let's call it, is this outward looking. This, outward things, people, situations, experiences. And that would be akin to the ordinary. And then the stage of special comes, and there's the focus starts to, from outward, starts to turn inward, just subtly. And then the singular is really inward, really, really inward, all the way in. And actually then there's a subtle rejection of the outward life in that singular. It's that all in, all inward, 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 inward. And then awakening occurs. And this is to speak to his fourth stage of perfect. So I'd say the second and third stages are the turning inward. Mm-hmm. So the fourth stage is the perfection of it all, that awakening that we're talking about. For me, that then can start to look outward again. But the outward is never going outward. It is bringing the inward into all. So it is the union of both inner and outer at that point. So it's like the focus, and I certainly in my life I've noticed my focus starts to look outward again now, but in a different manner. It's not outward for the sake of outward. It is the inner becomes the outer. The inner is like the percolation of the self, the big self, the divine is percolating into all layers, all levels of existence. And that it then encompasses the entirety of the outer and the inner. All is perfect. All is included. All is the self.
Yes. And so whether it's actually outwardly contemplative, outwardly active, outwardly anything in between, the establishment
this is it
of the divine nature, the bliss, the consciousness that we are is.
So this is why I would describe myself as having a contemplative focus. Because that's, to me, the center point of everything.
Yeah.
Even if you're out there at a party.
Yeah, right on. But you're thinking, I'm still not terribly inclined.
Well, there's the hermits of us, the introvert hermits of us.
Well, in a sense, you've gone beyond, when by the time you got to this fourth stage, then you're beyond causes. You're beyond it. It's simply what is now, and there's no sort of. I think what is it? I think let me get this clear. I think it was the first stage of awakening in Theravada Buddhism. I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's called stream entry. And the stages of awakening, there are stages of awakening in this tradition. I think it's stream entry, once returner, non-returner, something like that. Stages, and they're associated with different fetters, which are notions, ideas that are wrong view, and they're the things that obstruct you from clear seeing. So there's the progressive destruction of these fetters that gets it. And so the first, there was in stream entry, which is like the first stage of awakening, the 3 fetters are destroyed now, and I don't think I'll remember all of them, but one of them is the self view. Meaning the individual self view, that seemed to be false. Doubt is gone, and the third one was interesting. It's something like oh God, what is it? It's something like performing actions for enlightenment. The point is that you've transcended the need to perform any action to have what you already are. Right. Whereas before that, you're performing actions, you're going to, satsang, and you're performing meditation, and you're praying, and you're making yagyas and ablutions, and you're doing all this stuff, and it's all for. But once you've awakened to the self, there's nothing you have to do anymore. It's done. There's no act. The causality.
Well, action may still happen.
It still happen, yes, but there's no one to whom that pertains, and so there's no. Because
I don't want to people misunderstand that as like, oh, well, I'm good. I don't need to do anything. Then it's like, no, that's not quite what's being said. There.
Figure it out and you'll see it. But
Yes. It's like, oh, cool. Get to that stage and then I'll be done.
You got to pop that fetter first, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's like that. That perfect is then these orientations. There's nothing you need to do anymore to attain what you already are.
Yeah, there's a recognition of I always was that.
Always was this, yes. Yeah. And so in some ways...
And any doing was a symptom of that being revealed.
Right on. So I think these orientations, let's say the 4 stages and all that, I think that you can see them in different layers, different lights, different states, let's say.
And actually each tradition has its way of describing this and its language and its focus even. There can be very different focal points that make it look like they're talking about very different things. But to me... Actually, it all boils down to the unveiling of our pure nature underneath. And there are stages of that veiling.
Progressive unveiling. Yes, indeed. And I think that's been one of the things that I've seen all these years. It's, awakening is not just, people can suddenly ping, pop, and, sure. Drop
it's
into
a lot rarer than I think people...
Yeah, and ultimately it's not caused by anything that went before.
It's grace.
But
actually having years of meditation practice is also grace.
But and it's just how it shows up mostly. Yeah. And so without being absolutist about it, we can see that there are progressive stages, and I think the author's 4 stages is quite a nice
and it's not necessarily strictly linear in the individual expression and experience of that. It can be there can be glimpses of this, and there can be ebbs and flows of it. Like you might really get into the singular and then come back into the world, and it might not be perfectly linear for everyone.
Yeah, it
will have its own flavor and own way in which it orientates and integrates. But I think it is a nominally progressive.
It is a progressive
path. Let's say it just won't look the same for everyone.
And I guess what my teaching moment here, such as it is that if someone finds themselves, having, let's say, begun to awaken into this special, what the author calls the second stage, which is, okay, you're still in the world, but your spirituality's come online for you.
A burgeoning interest
and practice even.
Of the spiritual.
And, in another context, you might go, I'm going to go and live in an ashram or monastery. And that can feel like a very intentional thing to do. But sometimes it's just that your life falls apart, right? And that happens a lot because we don't have the cultural context. It just feels like I've got no capacity to or interest in the world. Something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Because
that's deep. That can be deeply pathologized and deeply traumatizing because of that pathology. And when because all you're left with is, I'm wrong. I'm doing life wrong. And that's what what you're left with is that feeling of I'm failing at life. This is a mistake. I'm a mistake. Yeah. And actually, it couldn't be further from the truth.
No, because we're being called, to a deeper, fuller,
different orientation.
But it's back home. We're going back home.
Exactly.
But the old self can really struggle to let that go, even when it just can't hold on anymore.
And your culture and your friends and your job and all the rest of it can have a hard time orientating around that too.
Yeah, and I love the way that the author kind of points to that inevitability, and I find it really, really instructive. But also, I love the quote that Adya Shanti came up with one day, in regard to, when your life starts going in a direction, falling apart sometimes, often even, your interests change, your focus changes, your energy changes. And it's easy to get a lot of resistance towards that. And, his answer to that is, let go or be dragged. That's not terribly comforting, but if we are being dragged, it's because we're being dragged home, home to our own being, home to our wholeness.
Oh, I'm really frustrated right now. Not really, but there's a quote on the tip of my tongue.
Go on.
And I just can't recall it properly or who it was, but I know if I start it, you'll probably pick it up where I left off. Here's a challenge to you. Right. It was a quote, actually someone quoted it on a testimonial for your website. That's where I'm recording it from. Okay. The quote of, if you find yourself on the spiritual path, you better go all the way.
Yes, right. So go all the way. Or don't bother.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't remember who.
Not that. I think it was Chogyam Trungpa.
Yeah, I think it was someone like that.
Yeah. If indeed you decide to sort of step on this treacherous spiritual path, something like that. Yeah. You better just better go either not bother or go all the way,
and,
get
and
it done.
Actually,
and I think
see
that.
the truth of that. I see the truth of that in my own life.
Yeah.
And I see the truth of that in so many people that I've worked with along the years. And just observing others, it's if the spiritual seed is burning in your heart,
Yeah.
nurture and support that and go all the way.
Yeah.
Or well, if you can, step off, because it's spiritual awakening is a destructive process.
Yes.
Now, it's not destructive to your true nature. It's revealing of your true nature, which is so beautiful. But it is destructive of all the falsities and all the ignorance of and beliefs of who and what you are.
Yeah.
And so it is
false beliefs.
False beliefs. So it is a deeply destructive process, and one that can be a really hard process. And I think not a lot of people talk about that. And I think I've spoken with many people in sessions of, why does no one talk about this? Why did no one tell me, how painful and how hard this is? I'm like, well, it doesn't really sell very well. I know that's a very cynical thing to say.
No, yeah.
But it's like, it doesn't. It's like people don't want to hear that. Don't want to hear that their life is going to be destroyed. But it's not. It's only the falsities that get burned. It's only the falsities that get destroyed. The untruths, the false notions.
Well,
the truth needs no protection. The truth shines through in such vivid recognition that is to be wondrous. But you have to walk through the destruction of all your beliefs, all your identities, all your false viewpoints of life, in order to have the magnificence of our true nature shine through.
Yeah.
And so it is a hard process. It's not an easy process, and it's not really a process you choose. It's a process. There's a calling in the heart, that a seed that gets planted that is that grows deeper and further than we can ever imagine until we're in the throes of it. In that, what did he call it? The singular phase.
The singular.
We go, whoa, what is this? How do I? And then I see some people like, how do I get out of this? How do the resistance to that? And so what I say to that is to surrender to it, to find your love of the process, even the difficult parts of the process, to find your love of that, because in that, there's where the resistance is softened and held. There's where we can find actually our compassion for our journey and our trust of our journey as well.
Yeah, it's funny. It's beautiful sitting here talking with you about this, because I talked a few things out with you that I'd read, but actually exploring it a bit more deeply, and it's really beautiful. I'm starting to see the beauty of the mapping out of these broad stages of spiritual growth, our spiritual unfoldment towards awakening the perfect, let's say, he calls it, which is,
and I could say we could come at this with different stages, cut this cake in many different slices in terms of the language, in terms of the focus of what we're talking about.
We could, but
this is really beautiful.
Yeah, what I'm doing in my head, though, is mapping it now more against my experience and against the experience of most of the people I kind of encounter who have who are heading towards or have already arrived, let's say, at this sort of transcendent perfect. Just that it's generally preceded by the singular stage, which is the total kind of one pointed commitment to. Now, the difference is that some of the differences between people is whether you want that, whether or whether it's just happened upon you, and how do you take it, and how do you
you see, for me, me, it wasn't that I was seeking it or wanted it. It happened upon me, and that was quite a painful process, I would argue. Like my experience of that singular was not necessarily a pleasant one. And it's taken years of unwinding that resistance to that, I would say. It found me, not me finding it. Even though I was born into it, it's still in my heart. I wasn't burning for this ever. No,
you were just carried along by grace through these stages. And sometimes it was really difficult, and sometimes it was really gracious. Well, it's all gracious, but whereas I was a seeker, I sought it out at every stage.
Yeah, you burned for this anyway.
Yeah, not to say it didn't get, it wasn't difficult, because it can get difficult. But again, it's an interesting stage analysis of how it seems to map out. Yeah. He's on the money. That's what I'm saying in a lot of ways.
So yeah, married monks.
A pair of married monks. That's our reality. They had us.
It is.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, me too. Really, really good with that. And I'm good with that even though it's often misunderstood. And and we are often misunderstood.
Yes.
For it. Although, there's plenty of people around who get it as well.
Yeah, well, this is it. Those who know, and they become more sympathetic. And I think we have to, as the author says, forgive those who just simply don't understand what this is about.
Yeah. And not even, like, it's like, oh, forgive them. And it's like,
it's not like you have sinned. It's not, no, just let them be. It's fine. I get it. Accept the fact that we're going to get, people go,
find the perfection and the beauty in people walking life in the way that makes most sense to them in their heart.
Well, this is why I wouldn't, you're right. This is not a point of condescension or judgment. It's like we're all where we are. Perfectly where we are. And I said in one of the other podcasts, the Gita says, trying to live the dharma of another is danger. Better to die in one's own dharma than to live the dharma of another. And so where we are is optimum. Yeah. Wherever that happens to be.
Cutting edge of best.
Exactly.
And so to live into that and to trust that and to not doubt that.
Yeah.
It like in that statement, what it gives is the total freedom to be as you are, but it also gives the total freedom for all else to be exactly as they are. And to me, this is true compassion. It's true love to relinquish our ideas of how one should be. And it's funny because early on when I was starting to mentor and guide people, there was still some leftover, and I could feel it now looking back. I look at it and I see my leftover sort of arrogance in there that basically said, I know what's best for this person. Like that like in a very subtle way though, like of, they should be on the spiritual path. They should be doing this. They should be trying meditation. They should be doing, And
me too. I get that. Yeah.
And actually, as life has gone on and life has humbled me and matured me in my own insights and deepening recognition of what it is to be alive, what it is to be human, where I find myself now is in great reverence and great appreciation of everyone and where they are at, and seeing the perfection in that and the love of that then. And it just, almost bringing me to tears right now. It's like just this recognition of we are all walking our path home. To compare that to another is to dishonor the path that we are walking and the home that we are finding.
So that's beautiful. There's one more aspect to this I think I'm just going to touch on, because we've talked about particularly this third stage, this singular stage, and how you're all in whether you like it or not. And some people that can be really difficult for, and some people just fall into it and love it, whatever. But for a lot of people, it's difficult. It's difficult whether to even just to choose the contemplative life, or to find oneself in a state where one is simply has no choice in it and is blissfully oriented, but maybe troubled by the voices saying, "Oh, you should be doing it differently," or something like that. And sometimes I see some people who are really sort of stuck in some people I've worked with, their life's fallen away from them, and they're stuck in a room. And they go, I can't do anything. I've got nothing to bear.
Well, that was us for a while.
Yeah, exactly. What now?
But yeah, I've run into plenty of people that's the case.
And
as well.
And one of the big troubles with this can come up is, how am I going to live?
Yeah.
Because what it means to be singular is to be disconnected from the marketplace. You can't work. You can't run a business. You can't.
Certainly not in the ways that the majority of people do.
There's right.
There are other ways of approaching that, I would say.
But I would identify now this singular stage as that point where I suspect, and I'm spitballing here, that when you get to perfect,
it becomes easier.
It becomes things will life itself will start to move you, and if that means moving into the marketplace again, or if that means engaging more,
I agree.
Right, perfect.
Yeah, I see what you're pointing to.
Right, totally. But this third stage, is a difficult one.
It is,
and
some can traverse it very quickly, and others it can
it can be a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. But it can be difficult. And I saying without the cultural context, and Ken Wilber talks about these different stages of cultural development. He says, as we head towards these more integral, which are the more sort of spiritual, let's say, levels beyond modernism and postmodernism, we have the structures come back into place where spiritually oriented people are financially supportive too. Yeah. Right. Materially supported, somewhere to live, food on the table, you're kept alive. But there's a fear, can be a fear, because we're in the first two stages, we're like, I need to eat, I can go out and get a job, right? I need to run the car, I can do some business and whatever. So it's in our hands. Here, it's a complete surrender. Like, it's out of it, totally. Right? It's out of our hands what we can and actually do.
Yeah.
And that can be very fearful, because that you're losing the power to be able to go and participate in the world in order to put the meat on bread on the table.
Trust, I have my own story about that.
It's about learning to trust. Yeah. And what I loved here, the author speaks to this. He said, and the title of the chapter is How God Answers and Provides Spiritually for Those Who Are Too Preoccupied with Loving Him to Answer and Provide for Themselves. He says, He not only, God, the divine, not only answers for us and defends us spiritually, He also moves in other spirits, making them want to give us life's necessities, such as food, clothes, and all else, when He sees that we won't abandon the work of loving Him to busy ourselves procuring these. Yeah. And he says, when you truly turn your back on the world to serve Him, and I would say, whether choice or not, when you truly turn your back on the world to serve Him, He won't disappoint you, whoever you are. He always provides one of two things, either an abundance of what you need, or the physical stamina and spiritual patience to endure its absence. Yeah. Those who are perfectly humble lack nothing physically or spiritually, because God, the divine, is all abundance. And those who have Him need nothing else in this life.
Beautiful. I really, really resonate with that, and have seen the direct
correlation
correlation of that in my life.
To trust the provision of the divine for our needs, even though we're not involved with those things that might necessarily procure them.
Yeah. We've been going on for quite a while here. Have we got time for one little story?
Yeah, we've got as long as we want,
I remember, and it's vivid. It's like one of those moments you have in your life where it's so vivid, it's so pivotal, so vivid that you'll never forget it, And I remember we were house sitting at the time, and this is I'm getting quite personal here, but we've been going there today anyway, so here we go. We were driving back with a car full of shopping in our car, and I think it was like £11 in our checking account. And I'm like, And it was right at the beginning of when we were doing this work, but there was I was also focused on, I was a transcriber at the time.
Right.
And I remember having this sort of real fear, oh God, how are we going to get next week's groceries in?
Yeah.
You know, we got enough for a week, but next week, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I remember in the car journey home, and I sort of had a private inward conversation with life, with the divine. And at the time, I was turning less and less, I was turning away from the transcription and turning more into the sort of spiritual mentor work that I was doing. And I was being called there. Like I felt a deep calling there. Felt like the right thing. There was more and more people coming, but the money wasn't there yet. And I'd chosen some years before, we both decided that to do it all by donation was what was right for us. It felt right. And I remember having this conversation with the divine in this car journey home, and this terror of this £11 and change sort of rattling around our bank account.
Yeah.
And being like, okay, life, if you want me to continue doing this work, you got to find a way to support me. It's on you. I give it all to you. Like, and that's where that trust came. Yeah. That trust and that surrender of life. It's like, okay, if you want me to, I am in service of this work. If you want me to be in service of this work, you have to find a way of supporting me. And it's funny, even though there have been many, many times of deepening into that since, but I can pinpoint that day as being the day that I gave my life in service.
Right, beautiful.
That I gave my life in service, and in that I trusted that. And actually, even when we've had some pretty hairy moments in life, which we've had plenty, I also look back now and say, and recognize that we've been supported materially. Yeah. Maybe not the way everyone else would think that we need to be supported, but we've
always had what we needed.
We have always had what we've needed.
Even though that sometimes was not much.
Yeah. And sometimes we didn't know where it's coming from until the day that it came, and that was perfect. And so it's not that it hasn't been challenging to deepen into that trust. Has had to happen again and again and again and again and again. Yeah. But it was that day for me.
Right, beautiful.
That day was the point at which I became in service of life. Yeah. I surrendered that and therefore trusted.
And that was the deal. Look, if you want me to do this, I'll do it. I'm doing it, you know. Yeah. But you got to
give everything to it.
But you've got to figure out how we're, you know.
And so to me, this is why my focus is that of the contemplative life. It's not of the material, even though that, you know, obviously we all need bills paid and food in our bellies and all of that. But to me, it's like I give my life in service. And if life wants to support me in that, then...
And this is beautiful, because this really this is the alignment. It speaks beautifully to the author's insight here, which he says, you know, God, life moves others and to want to give and support us, you, me, when he sees we won't abandon the work of loving him, which is, in a sense, doing the work of you know, sharing the...
And so, you know, I said this to someone because everyone's like, well, how do you work on donations? And, you know, it's a dicey subject because it's not the cultural norm and it's not how most people think and work. But, you know, like for me, and I know this is maybe a very easy thing to misunderstand for most people, but this is my viewpoint, is like, I'm not employed by the individual. No. I'm employed by life. Yes. I'm in service to life. Nice. And I like it's almost like with this joke we have between us. It's like, okay, life wanted to take 200 quid out of our account today. Okay. Or okay, life wanted to put it's like it's that. And in that is, on an individual level, then the deep gratitude for every gift that life brings us through the individuals, their heart moved to donate.
And sometimes it comes from something. Strange places.
It does, and so there's only gratitude to life and the individual that life is moving through, obviously. Yes. But there's only gratitude for life, what life is giving then. And it means it's like there's this deep humility with life, this deep gratitude, this relationship with life that is very humbling and very gratitude filled.
Yeah.
And it doesn't leave much room for entitlement.
No, none at all. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. None at all.
That stuff gets shut down very quickly.
Arrogance, entitlement. Yeah. Humility and gratitude.
Yeah.
Those are the opposites. And when you find yourself there, it's
and they're not positions to take.
No.
They're just obviousnesses.
Obviousnesses.
I think that's a word, but you
it
get
is
my
now.
drift. If you're listening to this podcast, you're going to recognize soon enough that I make up words all the time. Your
penchant for semantic creation. Very good. Hey, that was really lovely.
Longer than usual.
Yeah, hour and a half. That's fine. That's great. Let us give thanks and say thanks for listening, and
and gratitude to each and every one of you that crosses our path.
Yeah, hope you enjoy. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.